It was a Christmas night, the kind that settles heavy with tradition. At our house, Christmas Eve was always a grand affair when I was a kid. My grandparents, uncles, and cousins would flood in, filling the air with laughter, clinking dishes, and the smell of something roasting in the oven. I was 12 that year, old enough to notice the cracks in the holiday facade, but still young enough to feel its magic. Mom was in her element, orchestrating the meal like a maestro with a wooden spoon. The duck, her holiday specialty, sizzled in the oven. Dad laid low with a nasty cold, drifted in the periphery, keeping his distance from the bustling kitchen. The family trickled in, one by one, starting with Uncle Joe and his kids, Chris and Valerie. They were my closest cousins in age, the ones who felt less like extended family and more like co-conspirators. Chris brought a fresh, off-the-shelf copy of Driver 2 for my PlayStation, and that was all it took for me to abandon my sous chef duties. We bolted upstairs to my room, Chris eager to play, Valerie tagging along out of curiosity. But my mother's voice, sharp, urgent, broke the spell of the game. I hit pause reluctantly, knowing her stress was a beast of its own during these gatherings. By the time we made it back downstairs, the house had filled with the hum of relatives, dinner was nearing readiness, and the table sparkled with place settings. Then it happened. Mom, frazzled and breathless, let out a sudden cry. "The stuffing! I forgot the stuffing! Go grab it from the basement!" Our house didn't have a proper pantry. The bar in the basement was its stand-in, a catch-all for canned goods and forgotten odds and ends. I trotted down, the basement's cool air wrapping around me. Behind the bar, I searched for the stuffing when my eyes caught something odd. A blanket draped over a shape in the corner. My first thought? Chris or Valerie scheming to scare me. It was the kind of thing we do. But as I stepped closer, the silhouette beneath the blanket didn't feel right. It was too still, too solid. I froze. A flicker of unease crawled up my spine. Then, without warning, the basement lights clicked off, plunging me into darkness. The basement door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. My voice wavered as I shouted, "Chris? Valerie, knock it off!" Determined to flip the prank back on them, I crept closer and yanked the blanket away with a triumphant flourish. But instead of the startled yelp I expected, there was only silence. Then a hand, rough, unyielding, closed around my neck. At first I thought it was Chris, roughhousing as usual. But this grip wasn't playful. It was strong, cruel, and utterly foreign. Panic surged through me, and I screamed with every ounce of air I could muster. The basement door flew open, spilling light down the stairs. The man, dirty, disheveled, and reeking of desperation, released me. His eyes darted like a trapped animal's before he bolted out the back door, which led into the yard. My cries brought the whole family running. Tears streamed down my face as I pointed at the open door, stammering out what had happened. Uncle Joe and another uncle grabbed their coats and ran outside, but the man was long gone. The police arrived not long after. They guessed he was a homeless squatter, seeking warmth in the brutal cold of December. The officers' words were meant to comfort, but they didn't. Not really. That night, as the chaos subsided and the house quieted, a chill lingered in the air. It wasn't the cold, it was something darker, a realization that safety can shatter in an instant. From that Christmas forward, every lock in our house clicked shut the moment darkness fell. And even then, I never felt quite safe again. It was a Christmas night I'll never forget, though I wish I could. I was just a kid back then, no more than 10, and my dad was seeing this woman named Sydney. My mother had passed away when I was too young to form many memories of her, so the house had always felt like something was missing. A gentle presence, a warmth only a mother could bring. Sydney seemed to fill that void, at least on the surface. She wasn't flashy or overbearing, just there. She smiled easily, brought little gifts, and had a way of making us feel like a complete family, if only for a weekend. That year, she stayed with us for Christmas. It felt normal, maybe even good having her around. The night started off simple. We watched Elf together, Dad, my siblings, and Sydney. All of us sprawled on the couch, the glow of the Christmas tree lighting up the room. After the movie, Dad and Sydney retreated to bed, leaving my brother and me to stay up a little later, watching the Polar Express. When the movie ended, the house had grown still, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and shuffle. I was too restless to sleep, curiosity eating at me. Were the gifts already under the tree? Could I catch Dad in the act, proving once and for all that Santa was a myth? I tiptoed into the living room, careful not to make the floorboards groan. The tree glimmered in the darkness, casting fractured light across the walls. That's when I saw her, Sydney, crouched near the tree. My first thought was innocent enough. She was setting the gifts. But then I noticed her shaking the boxes, tilting them this way and that, like she was trying to guess what was inside. She reached into one of the gift bags and pulled something out. Makeup, I think. She examined it closely, her face unreadable in the faint light, then slipped it back into the bag. My stomach twisted. This wasn't right. And then it got worse. Sydney stood, moving to the kitchen with practiced ease. I pressed myself into the shadows, my heart pounding as I watched her open the cabinet above the counter. She took Dad's wallet, pulled out a few bills, and stuffed them into the pocket of her pajama pants. My breath caught, but she wasn't finished. Sydney opened the medicine cabinet next, pulling down one of Dad's prescription bottles. She turned it in her hands, reading the label, then opened it, sniffed it. That's when she froze. Her head jerked to the side, and her eyes locked onto mine. She saw me. Her gaze pinned me in place, and for a moment I thought she might come after me. Instead, she carefully slid the bottle back onto the shelf, closed the cabinet, and padded off down the hallway. I bolted to my room, diving under the covers as if they could shield me. Minutes later, the door creaked open. My breath hitched. She stepped inside, her silhouette outlined against the dim hallway light. She leaned over my bed, her voice a sharp whisper. I wasn't doing anything wrong, she hissed. I just wanted to make sure your dad was taking his medication. I nodded stiffly, not daring to speak. She lingered a moment longer, then straightened. Merry Christmas, she said, her tone clipped and cold. The door clicked shut behind her. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a second skin. Dad was in the living room, angrily asking who had taken money from his wallet. My eyes darted to Sydney, who sat there calm as could be, her expression unreadable. I didn't speak up right away. I was scared, confused, unsure if what I'd seen would even be believed. But later, when Dad's frustration boiled over, I told him everything. At first, he didn't believe me. How could he? But when I mentioned the medicine, his face changed. That night, their argument shook the house. Dad didn't ask her to leave, though I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. But something shifted after that. Sydney stopped coming around. Looking back, I wonder what she was planning to do with those pills. Did she mean harm, or was it just her way of keeping control? I'll never know. But that Christmas, I learned something I wish I hadn't. Sometimes the people who seem safe can be the ones you should fear the most. Christmas 2023 was supposed to be a quiet one, a reprieve from the chaos of the world outside. I'd driven up to Vermont to spend the holiday with my parents in their sprawling, snow-covered house, the kind of place that felt timeless, where Christmases melted into each other, indistinguishable save for the occasional new face at the table. That year, the circle was small, just my parents, my brother and his girlfriend, and my aunt and uncle. After a dinner that felt too big for the group, we lingered over dessert and then retreated to our sleeping arrangements. My brother and his girlfriend took the guest room, my aunt and uncle the other. I volunteered for the pull-out couch in the living room. I didn't mind. The couch faced the fireplace, and the idea of falling asleep to the last glow of the embers felt like its own kind of gift. The house settled into silence as I lay there, the fire crackling faintly, the shadows of the Christmas tree lights dancing on the walls. I drifted off, warm and cocooned in the cozy glow of the room. It must have been hours later when a sound pulled me from sleep. A soft creak, the kind the floorboards make when someone's trying not to be heard. My eyes opened to darkness, the fire now long dead, the room cold and still. I propped myself up, squinting toward the kitchen, where the sound had come from. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, the shadows shifted, and there it was. A figure, a person, standing just beyond the doorway, barely visible in the faint and ambient light spilling in from the street lamp outside. "Who's there?" My voice came out shaky, not the confident challenge I'd intended. The figure didn't answer. It didn't move. For a second, I thought maybe it wasn't a person at all, just a shadow cast in just the right way. Then it shifted, stepping lightly toward the back door. I sat up fully now, my heart thudding in my chest. "Who are you? What are you doing?" Still no answer. The figure reached the door, opened it, and disappeared into the night. The cold air rushed in, sharp and biting, and that's when I finally found my voice. "Someone's in the house!" I shouted, loud enough to wake the dead, or in this case, the rest of my family. Feet thudded on the floor above as everyone scrambled out of bed. I was already on my feet, staring at the open door. My dad and brother burst into the room, their faces pale with alarm. "What happened?" Dad barked, pulling his robe tight around him. I pointed to the door. There was someone in the kitchen. They went out that way. Within minutes, we were all outside, the snow crunching beneath our boots as we scanned the yard. It didn't take long to find the tracks, fresh, clean imprints cutting through the unbroken snow, leading straight into the woods. We followed them only as far as the tree line. Beyond that, the forest loomed, black and impenetrable. None of us wanted to go further, not at that hour, not in that darkness. The police arrived shortly after. They searched the area, walking the perimeter of the house and shining their flashlights into the woods. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no stolen belongings. It was as if the intruder had been a ghost, passing through without leaving a trace. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The image of that figure, the way it stood there, watching, waiting, stuck with me. It wasn't just the presence of someone where they shouldn't be. It was the way they moved, deliberate and silent, as if they belonged in the shadows, as if they knew the house better than we did. I slept fitfully the rest of the night, the pull-out couch suddenly feeling like a trap instead of a refuge. Even now, years later, the memory hasn't faded. Every creak in the night, every shadow that lingers too long, brings me back to that Christmas, to the moment I realize how thin the line between safety and fear truly is. Christmas 2023 wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was meant to be peaceful, a quiet reprieve from the frenzy of the outside world. I'd driven up to Vermont, winding through snow-dusted roads to my parents' house, a sprawling, creaky relic perched in the woods, buried under layers of tradition and silence. The kind of place where time seemed to loop, where Christmases blurred into one long, frostbitten memory. The gathering was intimate that year. Just my parents, my brother and his girlfriend, and my aunt and uncle. After a dinner that felt too grand for our little group, we lingered over dessert, the conversation dwindling into contented silence. Slowly, we peeled off to our rooms. My brother and his girlfriend claimed the guest room. My aunt and uncle disappeared into the other. I offered to take the pull-out couch in the living room. I didn't mind. The couch faced the fireplace, and there was something almost magical about falling asleep to the faint orange glow of the embers. The room itself was bathed in a soft, shifting light from the Christmas tree. Its colors shimmered on the walls, faintly illuminating the gifts stacked beneath it. Wrapped in the warmth of the room, I let sleep take me. I don't know how long I slept before the noise pulled me out of a dreamless haze. A sound small, almost polite. The creak of a floorboard yielding under deliberate, cautious weight. My eyes fluttered open to darkness. The fire was dead now, the room cold and heavy. I propped myself up, blinking toward the kitchen where the sound had come from. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then the shadows shifted. And there it was, a figure. It stood just beyond the kitchen doorway, its outline faint, barely more than a smudge against the ambient glow of the street lamp outside. For a moment, I thought it was my dad, or maybe my brother, wandering down for water, but the stillness was wrong. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, more uncertain than I wanted it to sound. No reply. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. For a moment, I thought maybe it wasn't real, just a trick of the dim light playing with my half-awake mind. But then it shifted. Smooth, deliberate. It turned and padded toward the back door, silent except for the faintest shuffle of feet against the floor. I sat up fully now, my heart thudding in my chest. "What are you doing?" I demanded louder this time. Still nothing. It reached the back door, its silhouette blacker than the night outside. Then with an almost casual motion, it opened the door and slipped out into the cold. The wind screamed into the room, biting and bitter. It jolted me into action. "Someone's in the house," I shouted, my voice tearing through the stillness like an alarm. Above me, I heard the thundering of footsteps, doors opening, voices overlapping in confusion. My dad and brother were the first to reach me, their faces pale, their eyes darting between me and the open door. "What the hell happened?" my dad demanded, his voice tight with fear. "There was someone here," I stammered, pointing toward the door. "They were in the kitchen. They went outside." It didn't take long to find the tracks. Clear, perfect imprints carved into the fresh snow, leading straight from the back door to the woods beyond the yard. We followed them as far as the tree line, but none of us dared to step into the darkness of the forest. The trees loomed, their branches clutching at the night like skeletal fingers. The police arrived not long after. Their flashlights carved bright streaks through the night as they searched the perimeter, their boots crunching in the snow. But they found nothing. No broken locks, no stolen belongings, no signs that anyone had been there at all. The officers tried to reassure us. "Probably someone passing through," one of them said. "Maybe looking for shelter." But the words felt hollow. The figure I'd seen didn't look lost. It didn't seem desperate. It moved like it belonged, like it had been waiting for just the right moment to make itself known. The pull-out couch didn't feel so cozy after that. It felt exposed, like a trap set in the middle of the room. I lay awake, staring at the dark corners of the ceiling, every creak and shift of the house sending fresh waves of unease through me. Even now, years later, the memory lingers. That figure, so still, so purposeful, has taken root in my mind. I wonder if it still remembers me, standing there, helpless and stunned. I wonder if one day it'll decide to come back.